Welcome to the Christian Campfire Conversations podcast, where we have real conversations about real topics. Our goal is to educate believers in order to fulfill the Great Commission. So without further ado, let's get on to the podcast.
What is up, my basic family? We are here again with another episode of Christian Campfire Conversations. I'm joined by my co-host Keegan Lowen. My name is Max Moore, and we're also joined by a very awesome special guest, Michael Scott. Not the Office Michael Scott, but a better, more cooler,
handsome,
funnier Michael Scott. Less hair, though.
Definitely less hair. Yeah, for sure.
Michael, you're a youth pastor, right?
Yeah, that's right.
For a youth group. So that's pretty cool. How's that?
It's good, man. Love it. Love it very much.
So Keegan, how's your week been?
Oh, thank you. Thanks for asking, Max. It's been a stellar week. It's been good, nice and busy, and that's how we like it. I've been looking forward to recording this podcast. I think this is going to be a really good one, just for everybody to hear. So with that, Michael, how has your week been?
It's good. You know, we just got back from a little mission trip to Mexico over spring break with our high school kids, and dude, it was so amazing. Such an incredible time. So my week has been recovering from that, from 8 days away from home and away from the family and stuff, and taking some days off, just being home and stuff. So it's actually been really good. But yeah, it's a Monday, so we're hitting it hard again today. So yeah,
it's easy for us young guys to recover, right?
That's right. Yeah, man, hanging out with you guys, I'm just reminded. Like I'd like to think I'm still fairly young, but I'm just not, and that's all right.
You were probably in high
school
when I was born, so it's all right.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, a little bit of a gap.
No worries.
Well, I bet that
you're the only one to not speak yet about your week.
My week's been good. It's been I just got back from KC for the weekend for an NHS trip, so it was fun.
Stellar.
But yeah, no, it was. I feel like all we did is eat, and we played like a little bit of pickleball, and then shopped, but mainly ate. So, no, it's been good.
I can tell.
Oh, wow. Okay. I have to give you a tuck now, because of that comment.
I'm joking, Max.
All right, so not to bring the mood down, but we do got to talk about something that's a little awkward to talk about, and maybe we could talk about why it's awkward to talk about. We're going to talk about porn. So I guess, Michael, like, what is porn exactly? Because there's kind of like, I'm not on this certain website that has it, but I'm watching these girls, doing suggestive dancing, with minimal clothing, So I'm not on those websites, though. So I'm not really watching porn, right?
Wow. Yeah, that's good. I think, oh man, who said it? A long time ago. There's no real definition of porn, but we know it when we see it, right? I always thought that was kind of interesting. I have no idea who said that, but I remember hearing it somewhere. But yeah, so like you said, I'm a youth pastor. In 2018, I took a group to a conference in Colorado Springs. And it was this big conference for youth and young adults, and they had some breakout sessions during the afternoons, and so we kind of pick where they had a bunch of options. And so one day I went to two breakout sessions. Well, the first one was called "God Created Sex, Why?" and the second one was titled "Pornography, Is It Really That Big of a Deal?" And I don't know why I chose those. The presenters were incredible, though. And I came away with a ton of new, really, really good information. And then later that night, we were in the general session. And the worship band was playing this song. I don't know if you ever heard it. It's called "Stir a Passion." But the chorus just says, "Stir a passion in my heart, God, let it overflow. Let it overflow." And during that song, I heard from the Lord, as clearly as I probably ever have, that he was stirring a passion within my heart to talk about pornography, to make it something that is talked about, to bring this message and let the light in to it, right? Um, and so it was this really pretty profound experience where, I was finally just like, okay, God, I don't know what this looks like, but I'm gonna make this part of my mission. You're clearly giving me a passion for this. I'm gonna make this part of, we all, as followers of Jesus, have our own mission field, and this is my mission. To talk about this. And then fast forward just a few months later to camp. At camp with my high school kids, and we're having our kind of end of the night cabin discussion time. And I just felt, you know what, I'm just going to share this part of my past. I have a past history with porn. And I don't have a problem saying that now, because I know what God has done in my life to free me from that struggle. So I just shared it. Looking at the statistics, it affects so many people, and it's so much worse now with smartphones. And we carry these little computers in our pockets with which we can access virtually endless amounts of porn in a matter of seconds. And so I was like, there's a chance that some of these guys are struggling with this. So I just said, hey, this is something I struggled with. And it was just like the floodgates were opened, and it was like, yeah, me too, man. Like, me too. And like all these guys started sharing. We experienced the same thing. We struggle with it too. And I'll never forget, this one kid was kind of hanging off to the side. He was actually pacing back and forth, and I could tell like he had something stirring within him, and he just wasn't ready to say it. And finally he comes and he joins a circle, and he goes, you have no idea how long I have waited for this conversation to happen. He said, I thought this was just something that I was going to just deal with by myself forever. You have no idea how long I have wanted this to happen, so that I could not be alone in this, and so that I could have a chance at escaping this. And that just reinforced it for me. Like, this is something that we need to let the light into. And we need to make it something that we can talk about. So Keegan and Max, I am incredibly proud and thankful for you guys talking about it on your podcast. And it's uncomfortable, and we can get into why it's uncomfortable, like you mentioned, Max. But that's kind of my story of how I've gotten into. And so I've recorded a couple podcasts with people. I've spoken on it a number of times, and so just really trying to make it something that is brought into the light more often, because the enemy wants us to keep it in the dark. So thank you for having me on, and being willing to talk about something tough. So proud of you guys.
Well, no, and just thank you for sharing your story. That has a lot of power. Just one thing that no one can take away from us is our own personal experience. Yeah. And we talked to Dr. David Geisler on here, and he was talking in regards to evangelism, but he said, some of the most helpful ways to relate to people are, what has helped me, and that's kind of the approach that I take to talking about this subject. This is what helped me. And then one really interesting piece of advice, or piece of information that I heard someone recently say. I don't remember exactly where it was at, but he was talking about how he talked to people who had formulated an exact way of this sin, how they were going to avoid it, how they were not going to do it, but they had totally disregarded the most important point, that we are supposed to start with a relationship with God. And that is what's going to give us the power to do this. We can think of every possible way to avoid it, to take it out of our sight, and that's really great. But I think it's very important that we start with this relationship with God. So maybe if you want to share some of your own personal experience with that, and kind of share with people why that is so important, that you start with that relationship.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, they go for behavior modification. And so they'll put up blockers on their internet or whatever, filters or whatever. And I think those things have their place. Because I think that for some people, like, I need something that's going to stop me for a certain amount of time, and allow me some space to work on that relationship with Jesus. And so it's so tough though, because it's just such, Max, you mentioned why it's hard to talk about. I think one of the reasons why it's so hard to talk about is just it's so wrapped in shame. God does not deal in shame. For those of you listening tonight, nothing that I'm going to share is meant to make you feel shame. In fact, it's meant to make you feel the opposite. Shame is a tool of the enemy. And so the way I like to describe it is, one of the reasons why it's so hard to stop is because shame is like this downward spiral where I watch porn, and usually that's accompanied with masturbation, and I do that, and then immediately after I feel shame. And shame, the voices tell me you're terrible, you're worthless, you're awful, there's something fundamentally wrong with you. That's what shame tells us. That's not what the Holy Spirit says. That's shame. And because I feel shame, that leads me back to porn. And because I watch porn, then I feel shame. And because I feel shame, I watch porn. And you can see how it's just this downward spiral of just negative self-worth, where we start to believe these lies that you're awful, you are bad, you're worthless. And so shame, before too long, we're going to start to believe those words. And also, shame wants to stay hidden. It wants to stay in the dark. And so porn fits perfectly with that, because you're going to do it when you're alone. Nobody's going to be around. And so it's a perfect outlet for that shame. But shame draws us deeper within ourselves. And so in order to be healed of shame, I think that's a really important place to start, is understanding what it takes to be healed from shame. There's an author of a book called The Soul of Shame. His name is Dr. Kurt Thompson. Incredible book. But he says that we are born into the world looking for someone who's looking for us. We're born into the world looking for someone who's looking for us, and we remain in that mode of searching for the rest of our lives, right? The healing of shame necessarily requires the presence of another person who's coming to find me, and who's going to see me, and who's going to say, I see you, I see your junk, I see your mess, and I'm not leaving the room. And Jesus does that better than anybody, right? I mean, think about Jesus. He's beaten to a pulp, he's stripped naked, and he's hanging on a cross. Like the literal, like we say often in Christian circles that he took our shame, like he literally endured the most shameful death that a person can endure. It was meant for shame. Crucifixion was meant to cause the victim to feel shame, in addition to the enormous amounts of pain that they were going to experience. So he's stripped naked, he's beaten to a pulp, he's hanging on a cross right there for the world to see. And I think in those moments, God is telling us there is no depth that you can go in your shame that I'm not already there waiting for you. Jesus has gone deeper into this shame spiral than we can ever get. We can't go farther than he's gone. There's no depth of our shame where he's not going to be there waiting for us. And then he says, yeah, I'm enduring the shame on the cross, but you know this resurrection thing that I'm about to pull off here in just a few days? We're coming up on Easter, right? This resurrection thing that I'm about to just blow everybody's minds with, that resurrection is going to pull us both out of this downward spiral of shame and take us both home. And so, yeah, like you said, Keegan, starts with that relationship, but understanding, yes, I want to have a relationship with Jesus, but understanding that he is the one who comes to find me in my shame, and takes it from me so I don't have to bear it anymore. And then he's the only one that can pull me out. So
So why do I feel shame, when I watch porn or when I do those things? But why don't I feel as much shame when I gossip or
Mm,
I tell a lie or
mm,
I do some of those smaller sins? I'm
mm,
adding air quotations because they're not
mm-hmm.
smaller.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I just think that though, hmm, I think those other things that you mentioned, Max, are very common in our society, but they're very seen. I got, they're very much in the light. Porn is just as common. It's just not brought to light.
Gotcha.
It's not something that uh, people see other people doing, and so maybe those other things are a little bit more normalized. We see them a lot. They're a little bit more, yeah, just seen, and so uh, maybe the shame piece isn't quite as prevalent with that as it is for something that's just seen as so dark, so much just me and myself, and within the depths of my my darkness as a human. I guess I don't know if that makes any sense, but
I think one piece that's important to add to that, not sure the passage, but that passage that says, sexual sin is the only sin in which you sin against your own body,
mm,
and that, like, that always blew my mind because, I mean, I think, it still it brings a lot of shame on us, but at a certain point, you get a certain level of like desensitization towards it.
mm,
Um, but like hearing those words is super convicting. Um, and now and then if you combine that with a man who a man who looks at a woman with lust has committed adultery in his heart. Um, I feel extremely convicted from that. And
mm,
then like Max was saying, like that this isn't just a um, this isn't just a looking at naked women. This I think it stems from a softer porn, if you want to put it that way. In the the mind's imagination is allowed to run wild,
mm,
um, and any man that is not is not is not being specific about what their goals are in life, their mind's gonna wander. And
mm,
I don't want to just say this is just for men. That's just my experience
yeah,
as being a man. I've talked to multiple people who have had the same experience.
yeah,
What what is the best? What does it take for us to realize that we need change?
yeah, yeah. For me, it was much more than understanding that Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, anyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has committed adultery with her in his heart. Like I knew that. I knew that those were words straight from Jesus. Um, but yeah, it took some the presence of other people, and so there was a point when I was maybe in the deepest part of that during my college years that I was finally just like I got to stop this, and I don't know where to start. And I had this friend who I was like, man, can we get coffee sometime, or I just need to talk about this. And like I said, the healing of shame requires the presence of another person coming to find me, another person seeing me, seeing all my junk, and saying I'm not leaving the room. And so I told him, I said, dude, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm into. This is how often I watch. This is how I watch. I just told it all to him. And in that moment, he knew me and he saw me in a way that nobody else had ever seen me or known me. And he didn't say it with his words, but with his actions and his attitude towards me. He said, I see it, but I'm not going to leave you. Because bearing that, like bringing that shameful stuff to light is hard for a lot of reasons. One, um, it wants to stay hidden, like we talked about. Like that's what the enemy wants us to do. Just keep it to yourself. Don't bring it to anybody else. Also, sharing that with another person means that I'm risking feeling it again, like risking feeling the shame. And I don't like to feel the shame, so I don't want to risk feeling it by sharing it with somebody. And then we just have this fear of abandonment. Like, what if I share the deepest, most intimate parts of myself, of which I'm ashamed, and that person looks at me and they say, that's disgusting, and they leave me? We have this fear of abandonment. And so he saw me and he knew me in a way that nobody else had to that point. And he said, I'm not leaving. And that was the most powerful thing. And then he put me on some resources where I learned a lot of things about porn and about what it does to our brains, what it does to our relationships, what it does to society as a whole. And so through learning those things from the stuff that he kind of showed me, that was the kind of the point where I started to kind of have some healing, but I had to let somebody else into that for sure.
So I'm just going to use that as a segue now
Yeah.
to go, what does porn do to our brains?
Yeah.
I know that's a super vague question, but
yeah, how much time you got?
As much as you can tell.
Oh man. I think God, he created sex. He created it to be good and beautiful and something to be enjoyed within the confines of a monogamous marriage relationship between a man and a woman, right? That's what I believe God created sex to be. And from the beginning, Satan has sought to shorten that path. So like, we all have these sexual desires and they're good. Like, it's God created us. He wired us that way. But it's kind of a long winding path, right? Like, we got to go through life, getting married, like that takes some time to get to that point. And from the beginning, Satan has been trying to shorten that path where he says, you don't have to be married, just have a girlfriend or a boyfriend and just have sex with them, right? And he shortens it a little bit. And then he says, you know what, you don't even have to do that. You don't even have to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Just go out and have a one-night stand. Or, you know what, better yet, you could even be shot down if you have a one-night stand. Go and engage in prostitution. Just pay for it. They can't tell you no if you're going to pay them money, right? And then he says, but you know what? Here's the shortest path you can possibly have to sex. You don't have to even go, you don't even have to leave your bedroom, right? Just pull out your phone, tap the screen a few times, and just watch porn. And that's the straightest line we can have to get to this, to satisfy, air quotes, this sexual desire that we have. And so what happens is in our brains, the more times we go down the porn path, I call it, it creates something called a neural pathway in our brain. I'm about to sound way smarter than I really am, so just get ready for that. It creates a neural pathway. So imagine, like, you guys ever go like hiking or anything like that in the woods or in the mountains or whatever. You want to find that you don't, Keegan? That's right.
All right, Keegan can't hide.
I'll take your word for it.
Okay. Well, you can imagine, like, you want to find a beaten path to walk on, right? That's the easiest way to get where you want to go. We don't want to be walking through all these bushes and trees and stuff. Like, the beaten path, that's the way to go. It's the easiest. Well, at some point in the history of the world, if you just imagine some path in the woods, that path wasn't there, right? It was just as green as any other part of this area, wherever you're at in your mind. But at some point in the history of the world, someone came along and they cut down all the trees and all the bushes along this path. And they just walked on it. And they walked on it, and they walked on it, and they walked on it enough that everything died. And now the only way that makes sense for us to go on this hike is to go on the path, right? It doesn't make sense to go anywhere else. And so that's kind of what happens with our brains when we watch porn is we go down this porn path enough that our brain starts to have this pathway formed where in our brain we start to equate pornography and sex. They become the same. And at some point, with enough exposure to porn, that is the way that it makes the most sense for me to get the sexual satisfaction that I desire is through porn. I'm going to tell you a quick story. There was this biologist. His name was Nicholas Tinbergen. And he did this really interesting experiment with butterflies. So here's what he did. He had this cage, and he had just a bunch of male butterflies in this cage. They were all males. And he introduced into their environment fake cardboard cut out female butterflies, but he enhanced their features. So like he made their colors a little bit brighter. He made their wings a little bit bigger. He made the lines a little bit sharper, maybe a little bit more symmetrical. And that's called super stimulus, where we take something normal and we blow it up and we enhance it to be super normal. And so what happens when he puts these fake cardboard enhanced butterflies into the cage with the males, they try to mate with the females or with the fake ones, right? The males do. And obviously they're getting nowhere because they're fake. But he leaves the fake ones in there and they try to mate for a time. And then he introduces real female butterflies into this environment. And the males ignore the real females and continue trying to mate with the fake ones. They ignore the real in exchange for accepting the counterfeit. And porn does the exact same thing, where if I have been exposed, my brain has been exposed to enough porn, maybe not for everybody, but this happens for a lot of people. If a person is married, where they prefer porn, they prefer that over sex with their spouse, in the same way that the male butterflies preferred trying to mate with these fake things than the real female. And you can see how that can be so destructive for a marriage relationship, right? If the one spouse is preferring porn on their phone over actual physical intimacy with their spouse. And so the pathway becomes so strong that that's just the way that it makes sense for us to get this sexual satisfaction that we desire.
I think sorry, Max. One thing one thing that comes to mind is Jonathan Pekluda. What he said was, we train our minds for variety rather than choosing one woman.
Yeah.
He shared his story about when he got married, and after the first couple of years, he said he was the unhappiest he had ever been.
Yeah.
He thought he had escaped this guilt of porn, or he thought he had escaped the consequences of porn, but now he realized how unhappy he was with just one singular woman. And that's something that I hear so often, is that people, they now struggle in their relationships, and maybe not even relationships, but like even just with their communication with at normal everyday communication. I'll speak for myself. When I was deep into that, and probably for me it was 3 to 5 times a week. I couldn't talk to anybody with a clear conscience. I was a saved Christian, and I felt convicted every single time I did it. And I could not, with a clear conscience, talk to these people. And like you said, it just gets you in that loop. And it's a very depression. I don't want to link this with depression, but I mean, it's a very like sad route. And if you continue to go down that path, it opens up the door to all sorts of mental health issues. And there's no long-term joy that comes out of it.
Yeah.
It's all exchanging short-term pleasure, or just focusing on short-term pleasure and not seeing the long-term. So do you want to talk a little bit about how porn affects our relationships with our family, with our significant others, maybe girlfriend, boyfriend,
just how it affects different relationships.
Yeah, for sure. I think another, before I get to that, another piece, and why it's such a big problem today is just the internet is so vast, right? There's a quote from a book. I want to read it here on my computer so I don't mess it up. It's from a book called Surfing for God, another incredible book by Michael John Cusick. Look that one up if you need to. But he says, internet porn's sheer power and intensity create a heightened level of stimulation that your brain was never intended to experience. Because of this, the brain of a man regularly using porn can change and shape itself to resemble neural pathways, like we talked about, similar to those of an alcoholic or a drug addict. And so, like, you can talk about dopamine release and all those different things. Like, it's just an overload of dopamine. Like, it's more dopamine than you were ever intended to experience. And so, yeah, like you talked about, Keegan, with Precluda, like, I mean, you could watch online for days and probably never see the same thing twice. Like, it's just, there's so much of it available. And it's this endless novelty. We can always see something new. But yeah, for the relationships piece, like, I think that, yeah, I mean, if we're preferring, especially, I'm married, you guys aren't, but probably hope to be someday. But like, if I'm becoming more and more addicted to my phone and not more and more addicted to my spouse, that's a recipe for a disaster of a marriage, right? Like, I think God created sex to be addicting. Like, I think he knew what he was doing, when he designed it to be between a man and a woman in a monogamous married relationship. Like, yeah, let's give them something that's going to cause them to be even more connected to each other. And there's this addicting effect. And why wouldn't I want that addicting effect of sex to be toward my spouse and only my spouse? And so, yeah, I was fortunate just with my story that I had a good enough, like a long enough period of time before I met my wife that I was off of it, that I think God, kind of healed my brain, gave me the opportunity to rewire my brain a little bit so that so that it wouldn't be a super negative thing for our marriage. But I think the relationship piece is just, when you think about the addiction part, what am I becoming addicted to? My phone or my wife? Yeah.
There's one more thing that I want to talk about, and then I kind of want to maybe end this one and then do a separate one.
Yeah.
A lot of times when we talk about porn usage, and we usually just automatically connect it to, this is a guy problem.
Mm.
And we do have female listeners that listen in. And I don't know if you have any statistics that, you kind of know, or maybe, do women struggle with this regularly too? Or is it just like the stereotype is that, only guys struggle with this?
Yeah, it's definitely still more predominant problem for males, but those numbers are getting closer together, as far as the female number getting closer to the male number. And another thing, like when you talk about statistics, the statistics are not really different inside and outside of the church. And so it's just as big of a struggle for Christians as it is for non-Christians. And so I see the porn message as a discipleship message as much as I see it as an evangelistic message. It's meant for those inside and outside the kingdom both. Just what I'm looking at here, this says 64% of self-identified Christian men view porn once per week. This is coming from Covenant Eyes, a survey that they did, 64%. And then 15% of self-identified Christian women. So the gap is big, but 15% of Christian women, that's a significant chunk of people. So that's a good thing, Max. Obviously, we're all guys here, so we're going to kind of frame it in that in that way where, when I refer to it, it's a guy's problem because I'm a guy. But no, and that comes from the advancement of technology. I'm sure that, everybody has more access to it than men and women both. So yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely not just a man's problem anymore. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think
Keegan,
this is good. We can
think this is good.
we're gonna continue in on this next week, and we'll focus on something slightly different, but you're not gonna want to miss it. I promise you that.
Yep. So I guess that's it. Peace out, basic family. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Christian Campfire Conversations. I'll see you next week.